Well, welcome to the third panel of the Gulf Capital SME Summit 2021. My name is Richard Thompson. I am the Editorial Director of MEED, the Middle East Economic Digest, and I will be the moderator for this panel discussion. Over the next hour, we're going to look at possibly one of the most hot topics and most important topics to have emerged for businesses over the last 2 years throughout the crisis, and that is the impact of the pandemic on worker welfare and how it has affected employee expectations and also employer commitments and requirements. What does it mean for for employers? How should they behave? And what can employees expect from their employers? It's a huge topic. For those of you who were just on the previous panel where we were talking about governance, good governance issues, this was one of the main themes that emerged from that discussion as well. So we have 1 hour to talk about this. I'm joined by a wonderful panel of experts on this. Leah Cotterill is the Chief Distribution Officer for Cigna Insurance in the Middle East and Africa. Nicol is the Managing Director for Business on Motion. And Jaya Maru is the Chief Executive Officer for the Middle East for Rewardz. So thank you to all three of you for being with us today. It's wonderful to have you. If any of you want to get involved in this very important conversation, please use the text field on the right-hand side of your screen. Send in your questions or comments, and we'll put them to the panelists, and hopefully we can sort of tease out as much insight and inspiration as possible over the next hour. So let's get into it. I want to come to you first, Leah. So as a general question, how have things changed? How have employee and employer expectations changed, and what does it all mean?
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thank you for inviting us to be part of the panel. Much appreciated. So Cigna is a global health services company, and we are always very interested to understand what employers' views are as well as employee views. We run a 360 survey, a wellbeing survey every year, and our latest results are just out in the last couple of weeks, and it's pretty insightful. So if I think about the UAE, for example, the UAE Wellness Index is measuring at 66.2 in the latest survey, and that is showing a greater level of satisfaction and well-being in the UAE community versus the rest of the world. And it really measured things like physical health, mental wellness. It looked at financial, social, and workplace issues. So the really good news is that we are in a better position here in the UAE than other colleagues and companies around the world. But there were some really eye-opening statistics. I think the one that really jumps out at me is the fact that in this survey, 50% of people reported that they were considering resigning in the next 12 months. Now, when we first saw these insights, we just thought it was almost unbelievable. And then literally within a week or so, Microsoft also released a survey which said that 41% of the global workforce were considering resigning. Then we saw some stats come out of the US for August, which showed that 4.3 million people in the US in August voluntarily handed in their resignation. So there's absolutely a trend out there, sort of, the sort of, mass global resignation. And I think, that is something that's fundamentally changed. And I think obviously, the really interesting discussion to be had, and I'm sure we'll have some of it today, is why. So what's happened that's really driving people to reconsider, how they earn money and how they choose to live their lives.
If I can jump in, Leah, I'm going to put that straight back on you then. So why?
Absolutely. $1 million question, right? So why? It seems to be that people have used this period through COVID to step back and reconsider what their priorities are. women have been particularly impacted by COVID. More women, let me give you the stat, 85% of women are reported to be being stressed, as opposed to 79% of guys. That's still a high number, but things have changed. Priorities have changed. You think about the sandwich generation, for example, people who are looking after younger children and potentially elderly parents. During this time, training, careers maybe have stalled a little bit as priorities of organizations and then individuals have been all over the place. And so people have stepped back and looked and said, what's important to me? Actually, work-life balance is important to me. The concept of mental health, I don't know about you, but I always thought as mental health was an illness, a disease. And actually, I realized that we all have mental health in the same way as we have physical health. We have mental health, and over the last 18 months, it's become, very normal to talk about your mental health. And, in the survey, 39% of people, suggest that they just don't have the support in the workplace to be able to be as resilient as they need to, and to be able to deal with the sort of multitude of different competing priorities on their time. So I think it's actually a shout out for help. From people saying, I can't do this and something's got to give.
If I just on this sort of these high levels of people reporting their intention to resign, it sounds to me like you're saying it's not necessarily because they're unhappy with their specific employer. It's more about the general work-life balance. So in that regard, given that we're here to talk about how small business owners should, plan, is there anything we can tease out from that sort of insights that people running small businesses can think, if it's to do with how do they change the work-life balance or things like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Richard. And for me, I feel that now is such a prime time for small and medium enterprises to be able to, to leverage this natural agility, compared to a big organization, to leverage this natural agility to be able to respond to these sort of, changing dynamics. Jaya and I were talking on a similar panel a few weeks ago, and we were saying that, flexibility doesn't cost anything. Some of these initiatives that the companies and employers can put in place don't need to be expensive. Look around, listen to people, recognize that one size doesn't fit all. What I may look for from my employer may be very different from you, Richard. I mean, for example, women tend to get stressed from situations where work imposes on life. Men typically get stressed from situations where life imposes on work. And so naturally, we just see, just in a very, very rash generalization about, men and women, that one size isn't going to fit all. So I think recognizing that one size doesn't fit all, and then looking around you and looking at what tools have you already got available to you. For example, in all of Cigna's SME plans, we embed employee assistance programs and health risk assessments and all these sorts of things, but many employers don't know they've got them. And so they don't leverage them. So I think there's some really easy steps there that employers can take to make a difference.
Well, thanks, Leah. I mean, you've raised so many really important topics. We'll come back to them. I'd like to bring in the other panelists before coming back to you, but thank you for that. Now, if anyone has questions for Leah or any of our other panelists on these, really, really critical issues, please use the screen, the field on the right-hand side of your screen to send in your comments and questions. I'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can even try and answer some questions that you might have. I can see a question has just come in actually from Ishan. Ishan, I'm just going to bring in the other panelists, then we can come back to these questions, but keep them coming. So thanks, Leah. I'd like to introduce now Debbie Nicol. Debbie is the Managing Director of Business on Motion. And perhaps, Debbie, before we get into the topic, you could tell us a little bit about your company first, but then, perhaps some of your insights that you've seen from dealing with your clients about the changing expectations from employees and requirements from employers.
Great. Okay, thanks, Richard, and hi to everybody. Thanks for having me. All right, so Business in Motion is a business consultancy and learning organisation, and its motto is moving businesses and leaders ahead through change. And honestly, the pandemic, you couldn't have a better change situation. So I think I'll be looking at a lot of the discussion today through the lens of change. And what we've been seeing through all of our client interactions is through the pandemic, there was so much disconnection. There was the poor owners or leaders would, for a long time, disconnected from the strategy, from the board, because they were in survival mode. They were in a mode where it was like, oh, I've got to pivot here, I've got to survive here, I've got to look at. So there was a lot of disconnection for the owner or the leaders. There was also a lot of disconnection for the doers, the ones who get the work done. They at first, what do I do with technology? How do I communicate with my colleagues? There was so much disconnection and confusion and chaos. And I think the focus that is starting to evolve now and emerge is it's time to reconnect, but reconnection going one step further. And I'll give you an example of what I mean here, or 2 points that I see. As we're reconnecting, we're realizing that things aren't the same, but we can make them familiar and known, and we can learn to grow with them. So 2 things that I see a lot of people, well, the first one, when we talk about reconnecting to the sense of belonging, which brings us into teamwork. But the teamwork today and the teamwork of yesterday is coming from a completely different angle now. Why? Because the teams of today are now aware a lot more of dependency. And because dependency in the previous time was a little less intangible, it was a little more intangible. And it was invisible. So people didn't value it. But now they're seeing, wow, dependency. I need to understand this, recognize it. I need to maximize it. As an offspring from that, dependency can't add value when people are disconnected. And people are often disconnected from a change when there's resistance. And so often a business leader will push resistance away, will see it as negative. So as people are coming back into the workplace, they're probably resisting being back in the office. The rules, how's it all going to work? Hang on, I've been able to depend on myself for the last 18 months. What about, is he going to trust me to be dependent a little bit more than I was before? So there's an opportunity to also now start welcoming resistance by getting to know it. And I can go into that a little bit more. But I think to wrap up, I would just say what Leah has said, people, not generations, but people now know what they don't want. Yeah, I was talking to a guy the other day. I don't want to drive to Abu Dhabi each morning and each afternoon now. And because they now know what they don't want, an SME's opportunity and a focus that I see is happening is let's understand what they do want, let's appreciate it, let's discover it, and let's work with it.
Okay, well, thank you, Debbie. I can see actually as you're talking, we've had another question that has come in from Thomas. Thank you, Thomas. Keep your questions coming. I'll put them to the panelists in just a moment. Debbie, you raised some words there that I need a bit of clarification on. So dependency, I'm curious, who depending on what? I'm not sure if I understand what you mean by dependency.
Okay, so in a team, we're talking about a set of human people, humans.
Yeah.
And they have cause and effect. If someone does something, there will be an effect.
Yeah.
So previously, when we were working with teams, were we concentrating on the dependency, the cause and effect, the impact that each has on the others, or were we concentrating on the individuals? So I think teams have evolved now to understand that we need to look at impact through a lens of cause and effect. And that's not just on the business side, but the people side as well.
Okay, so it's not so. If I understand what you're saying, it's not so much about employer-employee relationship. It's about the whole kind of human ecosystem. Is that
absolutely the humanity? How are people bringing the humanity into the workplaces these days?
I can see how that can relate quite closely to Leah's observation about people need something more than just a job. They're looking for that work-life balance, it's relationships.
Absolutely. And if they're not getting it, they will resist. So if we're not there with feelers open to look and feel and gather that resistance and listen to it, we've got so many opportunities to lose, because the Great Resignation is the next alternative.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. And I'll come back to you in a moment about your points about leadership, because I think that's very interesting as well for many people watching today. But I'd like to bring Jaya into the conversation. So thank Debbie for just a moment. I'll bring in Jaya. If anyone has questions for Debbie or Leah or Jaya, in fact, please send them in. Use the screen on the right-hand side. Jaya Maru, you are the Chief Executive Officer for the Middle East for Rewardz. So perhaps you can tell us first a little bit about Rewardz, who you are, what you do. But then what are your, listening to what Leah and Debbie have said about sort of, people's relationship with their employer and employees, etc., how that's changed. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. So first, if you can tell us a bit about Rewardz and then perhaps come in on those points.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here. So I've been running Rewardz now for about 9 years. It's a company that I started in Singapore, and we've been running the business in the UAE now for about 6 years. Our aim is to digitize and support organizations with employee engagement and well-being. And that trend and that purpose is so relevant now with everything that has happened through COVID. So we see this sector very, very closely, and we are constantly talking to CHROs and C-suite, and we're talking to people. So we do have a lot of anecdotal feedback and what we see happening on the ground across multiple organizations, both in the UAE and across our global clients. And continuing from what Debbie said, that theme of revisiting what is happening, I think we're seeing a very, very strong theme of reflection amongst organizations, because they suffered the chaos of COVID last year, where there were a lot of things which were knee-jerk reactions, and maybe things were acted on without much thought because there was no time to think over it. And now people are taking time to revisit and strategize. And there's a lot more importance on employees, specifically in the Middle East. Like, we ran a survey as Rewardz amongst the HR community to find out what are your top concerns. And not surprisingly, employee engagement and maintaining morale came out as the number one concern amongst HR leaders. And following that was supporting mental health and then managing operating costs and protecting employee jobs. So we see that the HR community is clearly very concerned, and they do recognize these themes and the expectations of the employees. And from the employee side, what we know for sure is today employees are looking for flexibility in the way that they're working, flexibility in where they're working from. And perhaps that in some way explains the trend of the mass resignation, because today the employee who's working for you does not necessarily see just that physical geography of the UAE where they can work. There's more acceptance of working from remote locations. And now they're like, this is my talent. This is what I can do. I can work for an employer anywhere. And I would look for an employer who can give me this flexibility and aligns with the way I want to work. And from the leadership perspective, what we are seeing is this trend of reflection, and many companies revisiting their vision, their purpose, and the need for leadership to be really clear and transparent about what they want to do in the post or COVID era moving forward. And that becomes very, very important in engaging the employee and reconnecting with them, and more specifically in the SME, because because they often correlate the leader with the business. To them, it's not separate, that whoever is C-suite is probably the company as well. So I think there's a lot of emphasis on leadership, clarity of vision, and communication in the organization.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Jaya. I'm curious, you talked about flexibility there. The sort of people are looking for more flexibility, whether that's flexible hours or flexible working location. But in Debbie's comment, she talked about that dependency issue, and I'm sort of not educated in these things, but for me, the dependency, I would imagine, requires a little bit of certainty about structure, who your colleagues are, who your boss is, what your job is. But flexibility is the opposite of that. You're not together. You don't know what someone's routine is if they're flexible. Is there a conflict there, do you think, Jaya, between Debbie's comments about dependency and the need for flexibility?
Yes and no, because I believe that today, through COVID, we saw that while we were working flexible hours, we had a huge support of technology, which allowed us to collaborate in a better way so that that sense of dependency was maintained. But what happened was we went into a shock mode and we had to learn overnight in terms of how do we work. And of course, there are lots of best practices that are still emerging. So, for example, when you put your employee handbook together and do an induction, you need to specifically talk about, if you're remote working, then these are the best practices that we need to follow. And earlier, it was not something that we spoke about at all. So I think they can coexist, but it's about realizing what are the best practices and how can we make it work.
And if I can come back to Debbie on the same question, really, do you see a conflict between flexibility and dependency?
No, I don't. I see them actually embedded into each, because maybe the word that I should have used is codependency. Dependency means that there's a cause and effect, but the cause and effect brings us all together to be one entity. And that entity, when it's got this clarity of the vision, when it's got the clarity of the goal, when it's all bought in, it will be able to flex in the way that it sees it needs to with what it's dealing with at the time.
Okay. And then before we come on to some of the audience questions, Leah, if I can come back to you on this, the resignation issue. Could it just be that because people have been locked down for 2 years, that, there's always a sort of turnover of staff, and maybe the numbers have dropped off for a couple of years, and now we're just catching up with a backlog of resignations? Could it just be that?
Not at those numbers, right? And the other piece is 50%. Is that realistic? No, of course it's not. But we've seen it in our organization. We've got a very low level of underlying turnover, but we've seen people making lifestyle choices. Saying, look, you know what, I want to go back and be with my family in the Philippines. You know what? I feel like I've missed out on too many years of my kids, and I'm going to take some time out and go and be with them. So I do I think it's catch up? No, not really. Do I think it's 50%? No, not realistically. But I do think there's something fundamentally different that's informing people's choices today.
So why don't you think it's 50%? Just because people might say something in a survey that they don't really mean, or?
That would be, me and Jaya are just gonna, quit and go. I don't know. I question whether 50% of the workforce can afford to just resign. Just from a common sense perspective. But that's not the point, right? The point is that they are in a mindset which is making them question the balance of their current life and work, right? Okay. And I think that's the important piece.
And just on one final question, Leah, you talked about the UAE's wellness index of 66.2, which you said was a good performance with respect to the rest of the world. Yeah. That 50%, though, I presume that's a UAE statistic as well.
Yeah.
Because we have so many expats in the UAE, is that higher? That kind of the comments you just made about people want to be back with their families or these sorts of things. Is that, and how does that percentage compare to the rest of the world?
So we actually see the global average go from around 45 to 50. So it's on the higher end of that,
Right.
but not massively out of kilter. It's very well aligned.
Okay, brilliant. Well, look, thank you all three for your opening remarks and for your comments. A lot of food for thought. I'm going to go now to the questions. We've had a number of questions that have come in, and please, if you have questions or comments, please send them in. Use the text field on the right-hand side. So I'll start with this one from Thomas, and I'll read it first, and then we'll decide who's going to answer it. So what are your thoughts on Portugal's new ruling on the legality surrounding communication between businesses or superiors and their employees after working hours for those that are working from home? That's an interesting question, and I don't know who to start with. Perhaps Debbie, shall I start with you on that one? So if I want to phone one of my team who's been working from home at 7 p.m. because something's come up, and Portugal has made that, sounds like they've made that illegal. What do you think?
Okay, I'm going to link, I'm unaware, I haven't been following Portugal, but looking at that, I'm going to link back to the theme that I'm feeling through the conversation, and that is that the pandemic has allowed people to become a lot more aware of what matters most to them. And they've also starting to see that they're different from each other. So what do I think of that? I think that I wonder how one size fits all can actually work in practicality. Now, if I was in a team in Portugal, I am the sort of person, I'm an entrepreneur, I do understand that working after hours is required. I would probably go against the law, but I wouldn't do it with someone who's come out of the pandemic, who's got 6 children, who is still struggling to get her feet back on the ground. So I go back to the theme that I think what has come out of the pandemic and what the greatest opportunity for SMEs is to get to know the individuals and to find where the commonality or the intersection and the sharedness exists. Mm-hmm. From there, any and all decisions can be taken from an informed basis.
Okay, now does anyone else want to comment on Thomas's question?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pile in, Richard. I wholly agree with Debbie. This, the sort of black and white, one size fits all, thou shalt not do it, doesn't seem to be a very practical application. Having said that, I do think finding those boundaries is important. So, we run an engagement survey, and I had the results for my team. We sat down and we talked about it, and we had a very open conversation. So I have 2 young kids, so I run my schedule, right? So I'm up in the morning, I get my kids to school, I start work, I run through the day. I may possibly be able to go and pick them up from school, which is one of the things I love about working from home. And then I will stop around 6:30 and say, right, okay, now it's kid time. And I'll get them to bed and get them sorted. And then I'll get back on it at sort of 8:30, 9 o'clock. Now, my colleagues, some of the guys in my team are saying, well, we're not like you, though. We want to, we're happy to work till 7, but at 7, I want to switch off. So when you come back online at 8:30, whether you intend to do it or not, I see emails coming in from you, and therefore pulling me back into work. So it was a really eye-opening moment for me as a leader, and great. And I appreciate the team giving me that feedback. So I am now more conscious about that, to the point of everyone's an individual, everyone has different situations. Some of my team love the fact that they can WhatsApp me at 9:30 at night and say, I need your help, and I'll be there. But then others of my team want their space. Thank you very much. So I think it makes great leadership a lot more complicated in the way that we're now working. But I think it can be also a lot more effective, a lot more rewarding, and allow a lot more people to have a better work-life balance blend, however we want to call it.
Jaya, I can see you nodding there. You have some thoughts.
Yeah, I can totally relate to what Leah is saying. I'm a mom of two, and my schedule pretty much works the same way. And I also have my counterparts sitting in Singapore who are 4 hours ahead of me. So chances are, when I wake up at 6 a.m., I'm already seeing messages come in from them. So as much as I believe that work-life balance and we need to draw a boundary, I think it goes back to leadership and knowing your employees and how they work and how are they wired and what is it that they truly value, and having clarity in terms of what we need to accomplish and when is it that we can afford to wait and just back off. And that's so important in SMEs because you have the flexibility and that opportunity to get to know your employees individually. And I think going to large corporations, I think that's one value that they should try to retain, where people managers do take time to get to know their employees personally and can draw the lines in terms of what this employee would like and what's their way of working versus others. Because yes, as working moms, I think the mornings are precious for drop-offs and you're busy and then you end up starting your day early. I remember the times when I didn't have kids, I would just show up in office at 9:30 and here I am, start my day at about 7:45 once the kids are in school. So things change, and I think it's about getting to know your employees and how they're wired.
Okay, I'll put this. We have another question here, which I'll put to you, Jaya. This is from Ishan, and I think it follows on from what you just were saying there. So, will introducing a 4-day work week potentially aid in optimizing work-life balance? So that means shorter official working hours, but I don't know if that's the same direction of travel that you're just describing, or if that's something different again.
To be honest, I mean, slightly different, but I have seen companies do that and they are actually benefiting from it because then people are able to clearly compartmentalize that this is my time to work and I have enough time to take care of my personal stuff. Whereas sometimes when you see the balance between 5 days and 2 days, it's not sufficient time. I've not seen companies do 4-day, but I did recently have a very long chat with the CEO who has implemented 4.5 days. And incidentally, they're all working moms in an organization of about 50 employees. And it's working beautifully for them. So again, I think it boils down to context in terms of what is it that your employees really want. And there can't be a one size fits all. And you need to first listen to your employees, trust them, and decide accordingly.
Okay. Now, Thomas, who I think Thomas asked the question earlier about the Portugal law about contacting people after hours. He's come in with a follow-up question, and thank you for this, Thomas. It's a really interesting topic. Please keep the questions coming. So Thomas is saying, so would it be a red flag for a potential new employee to declare their boundaries at an interview stage? So now, who do I start with this? Debbie, yeah.
I saw that question a few minutes ago. I got excited about it. I think what I'd like to add here is we're all going through change and we're in an SME forum. SMEs and the owners and the leaders have always traditionally worked as in we know how to do it or we're finding our way. But it's now time for even the owners and leaders to say, you know what? I've got to start looking at each as individuals. And when you're in an interview with a possible new candidate, ask yourself, what is it that you're bringing into the interview that could place that person against old criteria? So if we're talking about individuals here becoming more aware of their needs, how tapped in are you to those needs and how willing are you to accept that 10 people you interview are probably going to have 10 different approaches from now on? Are you going to mark some with a black pen and some with a blue pen? Or are you going to just simply say, that's what is and how can I work with it? Because that's the context of our reality now. And ... how are you going to allow enough resources in the organisation to concentrate on this. I hope the message is not being interpreted that an SME owner or leader has to put all his time into watching everyone's resistors and everyone's needs. Maybe we need to shift some resources into, I don't know, a 1-year project for someone to be really honing in on the people's needs.
I'm interested in what we mean by leaders. So obviously you mentioned just now owners and leaders, and we've been talking about employers as if there's kind of a direct relationship, but there's a whole sort of middle layer who are the bosses, but they're not the leaders and they're not the bottom. And they're kind of trying to square the circle, aren't they, with the corporate requirements and the human requirements.
However, during the pandemic, isn't everyone a leader right now? Hasn't everyone faced their own struggles? Hasn't everyone tried to engage with the situation? Hasn't everyone found a way to make something work? So is that another mind shift that needs to come in, from moving from organisations of separation and hierarchy to a little less and more connection?
Okay, thank you very much. Keep your questions coming. We've got some brilliant discussion points here, and I'm not doing them in any particular order, but I see Leah's name is mentioned in this one. So this is a question from Mohammed. So it says, Leah said, right, and the example is me. Now, I have my own company, so the future should be people and skill-oriented rather than organization-oriented. I guess this follows on from Debbie's point, actually. Absolutely. So, Leah, do you want to comment on it?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think that's just a perfect segue from what Debbie was saying there. And I must admit, Thomas, when I saw your question up there, I sort of smiled to myself, because I do think that if somebody sat in front of me in an interview, I think it would take me back a little bit for someone to tell me what they would do and what they wouldn't do, if I'm honest. But actually, back to exactly this point is, what are we recruiting for? What are we looking for in our employees? We're looking for skills. We're looking for contributions. We're looking for individuals. We're not looking for, an army of little same people that do exactly the same thing every day. And actually, the team can be better and complemented by having different types of people that bring different perspectives. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's about individuals and skills, and a lot less about the organization than it ever has been.
But as well as skills, though, and maybe I'm being very old school about this, but aren't we also looking at motivation and attitude?
Yep.
I mean, I guess that's what Thomas means by the red flag question.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, we've been talking for several years now about how we understand the needs of sort of millennial and Gen Z populations as well, right? This is we've talked about different subsets of the population and what their specific needs are, and how it's important for those of us that have been around longer to really understand the needs of younger people entering the workplace. Well, now COVID has just exacerbated that and spread it across everybody. So it doesn't matter whether you are the 58-year-old person nearing retirement or the 40-year-old mid-career. The reality is that everybody's mindset, everybody's needs have now shifted, and so it's that much more complex. And and we must have said it. I should do a count. We must have said one size doesn't fit all a gazillion times already, but it just reinforces that point, right? That everybody is truly an individual, and we need to listen to that, and we need to find our way through it.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I'd just like to add on to something that Leah said. I think with regards to hiring talent and interview in particular, one of the things we've found very useful organizations doing is being very clear about what are their values as an organization, and evaluating candidates based on alignment on those values. Because Richard, you rightly mentioned attitude is key. And especially in SMEs, you want to find people who align with your way of working. So I remember when I was just starting on my career, someone told me that your attitude will be key, and the skills are something that you can learn along the way. So I think from an organization's perspective, having that reflection and clarity of what is it that your organization's values are, and looking out for those while you're hiring talent will help you identify the right kind of fit for your organization.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have a question here from Abdallah. And Abdallah, you sent this in some time ago, so I apologize for taking so long to get to it. But Abdallah says, after the pandemic, when people used to work remotely, do you see the need to have the whole team in one place is fading away from a business benefit point of view? And which scenario is better for business and people that are doing the business? So I guess this is the question about hybrid working in the office or working from home. Perhaps, Jaya, if I start you talked about flexibility earlier. So what are your thoughts? I mean, what's actually better for the business?
So I must be honest, at Rewardz, we are truly hybrid, and currently we do not see a need for people to come together in one place. There was a time when 100% of the company was working remotely across 10 different countries, and everything worked beautifully together. But as COVID passed on, we all realized that we are social beings and we need that human connection. And we see the merit when we come together and the energy that happens in a room when we're all sitting together and working together. So I think what really works well for SMEs is having the infrastructure in place that allows you to work remotely, giving choice to your employees and understanding what their needs are, and let them make a choice. Would they want to work from their home, or do they prefer to come into the office, and have opportunities for people to come together, because nothing will replace that. No technology will replace that. That face-to-face connection and bond that you can build is very, very critical, and you must find opportunities to do that. So is there a need for everyone physically to be in the office every single day? No, I believe there's no longer a need to do that. But is there still a need for people to come together? Yes, very much so.
Okay. Now, we've got about 20 minutes remaining on this discussion, and it's a great discussion. Please keep your questions coming in. And thank you to our three panelists for their comments so far. If I can sort of interim summary so far, it seems to be that we're talking about the business owners and leaders should be thinking about the work environment as a kind of, well, it's a cliche now, but an ecosystem, a matrix, rather than a rigid hierarchy with lots of different individuals, different needs. And that's what people are expecting, employees are expecting now, I think is what I'm hearing. Leah, you mentioned in your opening comments that Cigna has you said something about you have a SME policies or SME kit or something. You said something along those lines at the beginning.
Yeah.
What is that? I mean, what does that have sort of guidelines on how to get to this more flexible world?
So no. What I was referring to is what the products that are embedded into our plans. But what the product does is a function of what we've been listening to employers, right? We've been listening to the market and what they've been telling us, and we've talked about the fact that mental health and giving people access to tools is really important. So Cigna have brought that to the fore in terms of the products that we offer. So, employee assistance programs, telehealth, online employee engagement platforms, all embedded into the solutions. But I think, again, it's about how we use those tools to help us get to where we need to be.
Okay, thank you. Now, there's a question. I think this does follow on from what you just said. I'll put this to Debbie first. This is from Sundar. How are your organizations taking care of stress and mental well-being for your employees? So this is, I guess, following on from Leah's comments about some of the tools for mental health. If I can come to you first, Debbie, maybe not just your own organization, but your clients. What sort of changes are you seeing for stress and mental health?
Okay. Remind me if I forget that question, because I want to link the answer back to something you said a minute ago, Richard. You said that it seems like organizations' futures lie in the space of ecosystems. And we all know that ecosystems, like the forest, et cetera, if there's one part that's unhealthy, the rest of it will be unhealthy. So if you take that into what's happening now, the workspace now, it simply is, my answer would be, it's exactly what we've been saying the whole way along. We need to Resistance will tell you when something isn't right, something's not healthy, something is bubbling away. And what we've got an opportunity to do, even though it adds multi-layers of complexity to leading an organisation, we cannot ignore the opportunity to get into those layers and to welcome what's in those layers. Remember, resistance is simply, it's not a bad thing. It's simply saying, give me what I want. What I want is attention and understanding. So if we can dig into the people's resistance, if we can understand where the mental health issue is coming from, for example, if we can understand the source of the stress, purely because we gave it what it is asking for at work, which is a little bit of understanding, a little bit of time, quality time, and a little bit of, back to Jaya's word, flexibility to work with it and around it. Because, as Leah said, we can no longer have a monogamous team all exactly the same, because the world, nothing is exactly the same. So this concept of ecosystem, I would urge everyone to go forth into Workspace 2.0 with that in mind. And that's exactly what's behind my comment of dependency with teams. Because when a team becomes an ecosystem, understanding its own needs, and something enters, e.g. a stress, a mental need, whatever, if it is so focused and so cohesive, because we've made them a human system, it will be able to shift and turn around that, and it'll no longer be an obstacle in productivity's way.
Okay, that's it's quite interesting. You're talking about a structure or an organisation that can sort of is continuously moving around the different sort of needs of different parts of the system.
Dynamic.
If I can just take you back to the question from Sundar, you asked me to remind you. So, what are you seeing within your own organisation or from your clients about measures to take care of stress and mental well-being?
So in other words, what I was saying is we need to take care of it, and the ways you can take care of it. One, I've just worked with a Cotterill organisation who were going back to work next week. So what did they do? They brought everyone together and we had 2 hours of exploring. What is it that I've got in front of me I don't know how to handle, and what would help us to handle? So those sort of open sessions, so that everybody can see it's not just me, it's all of us that have something to deal with. Yeah. So no matter what format that comes in, I hope that's one example, but you can wrap it in many formats. It's the same thing. Individuals know what they don't want, know what won't serve them, and they want that to be known and catered for, if that's the word.
Okay. And Jaya, can I ask you the same question that Sundar raised, which is about how is your organisation or maybe your clients taking care of mental well-being?
Sure. So there are many facets to it, and I think some of them can be very simple and easy to implement. And I've seen great examples in terms of what our clients are doing. I think one of the drawbacks of this codependency and flexibility is a constant bombarding, where people keep having on their calendars that I need to do this, I need your time, I need it, and everything is shared. So people sometimes just need that time for reflection and to do what they need to do. And I've seen a great example of promoting that, where some of our clients have implemented a no meeting time where people can actually do what they need to do, so that they know that this is my dedicated time where no one is going to block me from meeting. So I thought that was a simple but very effective way, and it's open out there, that don't let your colleagues do. And in the same way, they have things like learning hour, because often at times, I mean, we rely on formal learning and development programs in organizations, but with COVID, things are changing. They're becoming more self-learning. So I think those are some really great examples in terms of bringing up the awareness of what is mental health and well-being. I think there are clients who are organizing virtual as well as physical workshops to talk about it, to do simple things from like power stretch breaks breathing exercises, mindfulness workshops, and having very open conversations to the extent of going and using technology. So one of the beautiful tools that we have within our technology stack is an module where people can actually speak and record their feelings. And when they speak and record their feelings, it helps them break them down to joy, anxiety, and stress, and gives them a nudge in terms of, what can you do to conquer your feelings today? And I guess that's just a more digitized version of a traditional EAP where you're calling in and expressing your feelings. So making that more accessible and easy to use through technology for the digital generation today, where people can get into a habit of tracking their mood and being more aware of what's going on. Because to be honest, I think mental health to a large extent can be controlled and managed by yourself, and you just need to be aware of how you're wired and what are the drivers of your own well-being and how can you control your emotions. So giving the right context to the employee at that point in time becomes very helpful. And of course, I mean, an EAP program in times like these, especially, which is comprehensive and covers areas like financial well-being, legal advice, I think those can be such high stress generators for employees, especially in countries like UAE. And giving employees access to those, I think, becomes very, very important to ensure that you're doing enough on the mental health and well-being side.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you, Jaya. So just from Debbie and Jaya so far, I've just made some notes. So the open forum, open conversation, so people can talk. The safe space or blocked out space or time that Jaya mentioned, learning time, and you talked there about, and workshops, you talked there about, legal advice, financial advice, help around those, practical help around those stress issues, and then using technology to help people track feelings and be more self-aware. Leah, any other things that you would like to add, or I'm sure there's loads, but any other
Yeah, so I in our experience, I think, as Debbie and Jaya mentioned.
Sorry, can I just? I can hear a bit of feedback. I don't know where it's coming from, but Debbie, could you put your microphone on mute just briefly? I don't know. Sorry, Leah, to interrupt there. I can just hear a bit of background noise.
No problem. So I think absolutely echo what Debbie and Jaya were both saying about just listening. I think, in our experience, just having groups of people, teams of people coming together and talking about what's impacting them and what's challenging them takes away some of the anxiety because they realize they're not alone. I agree with Jaya as well on the creating time, creating space, but I do think it's important that is shown to be top down. So I think we have to, as leaders, we have to lead by example and show that we are also doing those things as well as, we're sort of walking the talk, if you like. The other thing that Cigna's done for its employees, which has been a huge success and great feedback, is we've run a series of mental health first aid courses through Lighthouse Arabia. And we've had different degrees of it. So some actual first aiders that have been trained to a higher level, and then a much broader series of awareness sessions. But, some of the insights that I shared with you guys today have been taken from that session. And like I say, it was just a real eye opener. 3 hours of, talking about it. People shared things about themselves that you would never have known unless you put yourself in that focused situation and that safe space to talk about it. So I think it's just little tactical things like that don't need to be really expensive, don't need to really take up a huge amount of time, but raise people's awareness to who you are and how you're thinking about things, and bring the insights in from the experts.
Are these these kind of, sorry to interrupt, these tools that you're talking about, I mean, this is to all three of you, I guess, but from you, Leah, does Cigna have it on their website? If I'm just curious to find out a menu of these things, is there someplace I can look?
Yeah, so for the products, absolutely. For the mental health first aid training, we actually partnered with Lighthouse Arabia. So you would need to go to them related to that.
Now, we've only got 5 minutes and we've got a few more questions. So I would like to just try and make sure everyone's being dealt with. So We have a question here from Gerald. I haven't read the question yet, so we'll decide who it goes to. So how do you build trust? Now, this is interesting. How do you build trust in SMEs coming out of COVID when many people have been feeling isolated or lack of face-to-face, especially with remote working? Now, I find this an interesting question about flexible working. Trust is really important. Debbie, if I can I'll come to you first, Debbie. What are your thoughts about the importance of trust to make these things work? And your microphone is on mute, so you might have to unmute.
It's really interesting how each of these questions is coming through in a different dress, but they seem to be repeating the same, or gives us an opportunity to repeat one key thing, and that is to understand and give a voice to the people and their reality. So, for example, that session I did in Qatar, my goodness, once people saw that they're not the only ones with an issue, with a fear, with a stress, you could just see, because we had a team that was, for 2 years, they hadn't been together. Half of them were new and had never met the other people in person. So that itself is a bit of a stress as well. So, I think it's just a matter of continuing to recognize individuals, continuing to encourage the voices to be heard, the reality to be out there, and trust. Trust takes a long, long time, but shui, little bit by little bit, I think, if there's genuine interest and care shown, remember, they will mirror you. If they feel that, they'll give that.
Okay. Now, we have two questions here. I'm going to put these to you, Jaya. Anyone else can come in afterwards, but they're both about training. The first is from Nadozi, who says, with regards to hybrid working, how do you deliver and validate good quality technical and practical training? And the second related question is from Thomas, who says he recently attended a summit paying attention to online training versus traditional face-to-face classroom-style training. So what are your thoughts on the benefits and challenges? So I think those two questions relate to each other. Any thoughts, Jaya, on how to deliver training in this new kind of world?
So to be very honest, I have limited experience in training, but what we see our clients doing is adding an element of gamification to online learning. And they tend to incentivize that online learning. And they have, through our technologies, doing things like, scratch and win. So if you attend a training, you stand to win points, and with those points, you can redeem a reward of their choice. So I think it's about making it fun and engaging. And the nature of training is such that if it's something that's delivered by a person, you have to be very clear about who you're identifying to deliver. And it cannot be that, you just go and see what's their training experience. If it's virtual, you need to be specific in terms of what is their virtual training experience, because it's a different world, it's a different platform. So I think those are some practical tips to take care of. And if it's something that's purely online, then I think it's about having opportunities, while you let people do it in their own space and time, but also maybe providing avenues. If you need like 30% of your employees to complete the training, then maybe you can just block people's time and say that, hey guys, we all need to do this training. Let's set up a Zoom calendar and let's just do it together. So while it's independent, it can still be something that can be shared amongst employees. Okay,
and Leah, do you have any thoughts on training? Is this something that Cigna has looked at?
Yeah, absolutely. And echo Jaya's points, and just would add, the concept of bite-sized chunks, right? So, particularly for the virtual training, rather than bombarding people in one, in one long session, knowing that focus is a challenge and sitting in front of a laptop's a challenge for such a long time. I think, we've used the concept of bite-sized chunks along with gamification really successfully.
Okay, well, I'm afraid that we've run out of time. This has been a fantastic discussion. There is one final comment from Mohammed, which I'm just going to read it so that everyone has been covered, and I think it relates, actually. So Mohammed is saying that he's a lecturer in construction, and from his experience, online learning has had a negative effect on undergraduates. However, he says it opened more venues for improvements for professionals, so ongoing professional development. So that's a comment from Mohammed, and thank you for that, Mohammed. But I'm afraid we've run out of time. I have to close everything down now. It's been an absolutely brilliant discussion. Thank you to our three panelists, to Leah, to Debbie, and to Jaya. If any of you want to sort of follow up with questions to the panelists, please send them into MEED, and we will circulate them with the panelists, because it's such an important issue, and really is, well, to me at least, it seems like incredibly complicated and difficult issue as well. I mean, everything is changing, as Debbie said at the beginning. But thank you, everybody. We have to go now. The next panel discussion is taking place immediately, and it's on the general view on the challenges facing the SME sector. So if you can, join us at the next panel. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you to our three panelists. And I'll see you all soon. Look after yourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you.